Welcome everyone to another AFK video. So today I wanted to do a 2.0 video of my Celestial Being deck. So previously when I did the deck list, I did it based on the starter decks, cards only, and of course I at the time did not have any of the Steel Requiem cards as the set had not come out yet. I've gotten to use it both as, just the starter deck and with the Steel Requiem cards, and I have since made a lot of changes to the deck, so I wanted to go over what my Celestial Being deck looks like now. I used it at locals fairly recently. I went 2-2 with it. There was one game where one change that I will mention when it comes up that I thought about making would have really helped in that game, having me, so I would have gone 3-1, but that one other game that I lost, I had absolutely zero chance. So yeah, without further ado, let us get right into it. I'm running 4 copies of O Gundam, right? So I guess this is just kind of left over from GD01. I still feel like every deck should have 4 copies of your level 2 1 cost 2/2s, so you can play in the early game, so you can kind of use whatever leftover resource you have in the late game. So straightforward, play them basically to use at any point during the game. So I've got 4 copies of Gundam Virtue. So Gundam Virtue here obviously acts as a blocker as long as you have a pilot. So the deck runs a lot of pilots actually. So that shouldn't really be an issue, but even if you don't, I mean, it's still a 3/2, level 3, 2 cost, 3/3. It links with Tieria, which is relevant since Tieria is in the deck. So I run it at 4. I've got 2 copies of Dynames, right? So that I have a few more units in the low end. It links with Lockon, who is also in the deck. So that's just something in case, I don't get any of the better links. All right, so next up, I've got 4 copies of Little Exia, right? So Little Exia, I really like this card because it's level 4, 2 cost. It's a 4/3, so it's got a decent stat line, low cost. It links with Setsuna as a vanilla. Usually end up using this to kind of trade with smaller things, or you link it with Exia, so you get you link it with Setsuna, and then you get to crash into things that are much bigger than it, so you can get those things off the board. All right, so moving right along, next up on the level 4 list, we have Dynames, right? So Legend Rare Dynames, obviously one of the most powerful cards that came out of the starter deck. This card is an absolute menace, so obviously we want to run 4 of, because we want to make sure that we see this card every game and we want to be able to use it, right? So next up, let's go to our 5 costs. So I run 2 copies of this Virtue from the set. I have my doubts about this card pretty much every time I use this deck because it's got a really high cost, right? 4 resource for this is not something you you really want to spend. If you spend 4 resource, you feel like you want to get a bit more, right? But it's still a 3/3. It links with Tieria. It's got support, and it has a kind of tricky ability that allows you to like destroy your opponent's stuff as long as you've got, a CB pilot on the board, which is nice. But I made an adjustment to this deck, so this is not something that we can use kind of like, oh, I'm going to use the support ability and now, I'm going to force you to attack this thing. Unfortunately, I've made some changes and that's likely not going to happen anymore. So maybe this comes out, but for now, it'll stay at just 2 copies. All right, so next up, we've got 4 copies of Dynames, right? So this is the big Dynames with Breach. When it links with Lockon, you get the same exact stat line as you do with the Legend Rare Dynames, right? You still get a 5/6. which is really nice. It's got breach. You're able to, and when you link it, you're able to hit things that are active. So that's really nice. I really like seeing this card, so I run it at 4 copies. All right, so next up, to round out the level 5 costs, we've got Exia, right? Legend Rare Exia from the starter deck. So this card gives you a bit of draw, which is one thing that the deck doesn't really have, right? So when you pair it, you get to mill 2 and then draw a card. It's very unlikely that you're going to whiff with this deck because all except for 4 cards are celestial beings. So if you hit 2 of those cards that aren't, then I mean, you know, bad luck. But for the most part, this is mill 2, draw 1. Unfortunately, that 1 resource ability to be set as active at the end of your turn is not utilized in this deck. So a bit of wasted value there, but all in all, links with Setsuna, still good to see. And this on pair effect obviously works with any celestial being pilot. All right, now I'm going to collapse this just a little bit because I've got one more card that I want to show, and I want to make sure that I get everything on screen here. All right, so the last unit that I run is 2 copies of Trans Am Exia. Now, this is the card that I mentioned having some thoughts about, like trading out. So I found that the 10 card condition is very tough to reach in some games, especially when you've got Dynames running wild at 1 or 2 copies and, you know, they're healing and they're not dying, so they're not adding to the count. And you end up in a situation where having access to this ability would be really helpful, but, you know, you also haven't met that 10 card quota. Another thing, obviously, if your opponent has blockers, you can't use the suppression ability or, you know, the ability to blow things up even if you have the 10 cards. So, I don't know. I've thought long and hard about replacing it, and the replacement that I thought of was going to be the GN Armor Type E, right? So this is the level 6 4-cost blocker. That's a 5/4 that links with any CB, right? So this card is flexible. Again, it's a blocker, so it can usually trade very well with other things, kind of like the Masala does in the blue decks, the blue O decks. Yeah, so if I'm going to replace anything in here, for sure it's going to be Trans Am Exia and replace it with this. But yeah, so those are all the units for the deck, and yeah, let me get the table cleaned up and then we can move on to the rest of the card. And we're back. All right, so next up, let's get our pilots on the table. All right, so I run 4 copies of Setsuna. Right, let's get that into the frame there. All right, so we run 4 copies of Setsuna. Setsuna's a great card. Offensive utility, links with a bunch of things. So still not as strong as the next pilot, as it were, but still one that you're always glad to see. So the star of the show obviously is Lockon. Lockon makes up the other half of the Legend Rare Dynames link, right? So Lockon in this deck allows you to attack readied units as long as they have the same level or lower when you pair it with a CB unit, so that's always going to go off. But he's one of those units that's, you know, wider than he is taller, so, you know, he gives you more defense than he does offense, but I kind of like that. And yeah, so love to see this card. Use it in just about every CB deck that runs green, so I expect that to continue. All right, so next up, I've decided to run 4 copies of Tieria, right? So this deck likes the links. You're able to get them off pretty consistently, and being able to get these off of, you know, your shields is always really helpful. I still really like Tieria. He gives very little in the form of stats, despite being a pilot card at level 4. Usually you get 2 and something, but because he has some utility that allows you to get some card advantage, right? I feel like it's worth playing at 4. So next up, we've got our base, and we've got 4 copies of the Ptolemaios base, right? So this is a base that you can play in the early game. It's got 5 HP, and it's it's really solid in that if you are running, if you're running on all cylinders at the early parts of the game and you've got units on the board that are rested, your opponent can't deal damage to this base with any of their units that are level 3 or lower, so they have to take out your units, right? One important note that I like pointing out because it's interesting is that the Ptolemaios base specifically mentions that this base can't receive damage from enemy units, right? So because it doesn't specify battle damage, this unit is this base is actually protected from breach damage, which there isn't a whole lot of stuff currently that's level 3 or lower that's breaches, but I know that the Rickdom obviously is a really popular one that still gets play that has breach 2, and I know that in Phantom Aria coming up there will be the Gadil, which will get breach 3 as long as you're hitting a damaged unit, and of course the dual Gundam. But yeah, those are like very few, those are probably all the examples of breach at level 3 or lower that are relevant here, right? Okay, and let's wrap this up with the final card that I teched in, and this is 4 copies of Bridge Crew, right? So one of the things that I noticed is that if my opponent has something that I can't attack because it's readied, and that would cost me the game, obviously, I found that Bridge Crew is a good kind of workaround to that. Originally I had 4 copies of Armed Intervention, but I found that it sat in my hand more often than not than I was able to actually use. And so I thought, well, what if I, instead of trying to do things reactively, try to do things proactively, right? So Bridge Crew allows me to attack an active unit as long as it's not piloted, right? And you would be surprised how often a very valuable target is left readied without a pilot. So Bridge Crew, I've found a good amount of success with it. I plan to continue to use it in my green decks. So, and it also has the added benefit of if you see it in your burst, you get to add it to your hand so it isn't wasted. So that's always good, right? So yeah, this is my personal CB build for green purple currently. I know that there are going to be some other variations come Phantom Aria, which I'm really excited to have a look at, but let me know what you think about this particular build. I plan on using it one more time at least before Phantom Aria comes out. So yeah, I'll post any results for that if they're pretty good. But yeah, again, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video.